In a city where your net worth determines your worth as a human being, one woman was about to learn the harshest lesson of all. She stood in the center of the most exclusive ballroom in New York, surrounded by diamonds and disdain, treated like invisible dust by the people she once called friends. They thought they could break her. They thought she was nobody. But they didn't know who was walking through those doors. When the most powerful man in the room walked past the billionaires to take her hand, the silence was deafening. This is the story of betrayal, ultimate karma, and the twist no one saw coming. You won't believe how this ends. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and ruthless ambition. It was the night of the annual Aurora Gala, an event so exclusive that invitations were not mailed. They were hand-delivered by private couriers in velvet-lined boxes. For the elite of Manhattan, this was the summit of social relevance. For Charlotte Miller, it was a battlefield where she had arrived without armor. Charlotte stood near the periphery of the room, clutching a glass of sparkling water as if it were a lifeline. She wore a simple, vintage navy dress she had altered herself. It was elegant, fitting her slender frame perfectly, but in a sea of custom Versace and limited edition Dior, it screamed outsider. She wasn't supposed to be here, or rather, she was supposed to be here as a rising fashion consultant, a guest of her fiancé, Preston Walsh. But Preston was currently on the other side of the room, laughing with a group of venture capitalists, his hand resting comfortably on the lower back of a woman who was definitely not Charlotte. "Look who decided to show up!" A voice dripped with saccharine venom from her left. Charlotte stiffened. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Vanessa Carmichael. Vanessa was the kind of woman who treated life like a chess game, where she was the queen and everyone else was a pawn to be sacrificed. She was draped in a crimson gown that likely cost more than Charlotte's entire student loan debt. "Vanessa," Charlotte said, keeping her voice steady. "I see you made it." "Of course I made it, darling. My father is on the board," Vanessa sneered, stepping closer, her eyes scanning Charlotte's outfit with a look of theatrical pity. "But you? That dress? It's quaint. Did you find it at a charity shop? It's very brave of you to wear something so accessible." The two women flanking Vanessa, sisters named Tiffany and Brittany, whose only contributions to society were their trust funds, giggled behind their champagne flutes. "It's vintage," Charlotte said, lifting her chin. "And Preston invited me." "Preston?" Vanessa laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that drew eyes. "Oh, honey, you haven't checked your messages, have you? Or maybe you just can't take a hint. Preston brought you to hold his coat until the real guests arrived. Look at him." Charlotte looked. She couldn't help it. Across the room, Preston was whispering something into the ear of the woman beside him, a tall, statuesque blonde wearing the latest season's must-have emerald necklace. The woman laughed and leaned into him, staking her claim. Vanessa leaned in, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "That's Lady Genevieve. Oil money. Old European lineage. She can buy Preston the partnership he wants. You? You're just the girl who helped him pick out his ties when he was a junior associate. You're a placeholder, Charlotte. A nobody." The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks, a mix of humiliation and suppressed rage. She had spent 3 years supporting Preston, editing his briefs late into the night, soothing his ego when he lost a case, and believing in his promises. "I should go talk to him," Charlotte said, though her feet felt leaden. "Please do," Tiffany chimed in. "I'd love to see the security escort you out. It would be the highlight of the evening." Charlotte turned away from them, her heart hammering against her ribs. She navigated through the crowd, dodging waiters carrying trays of caviar and foie gras. The noise of the gala, the clinking of crystal, the roar of polite conversation, the live orchestra playing Mozart, felt overwhelming. She needed to find Preston. She needed him to tell her that Vanessa was lying, that he wasn't discarding her like last season's handbag. She found him near the ice sculpture. He saw her approaching, and for a fleeting second, a look of annoyance crossed his handsome features before he masked it with a practiced politician's smile. "Charlotte," he said, not stepping away from Genevieve, "I thought you were grabbing a drink." "I was," Charlotte said, her voice trembling slightly. "But Vanessa said—" Preston sighed, checking his Rolex. "Look, Char, this isn't the best time. Genevieve here was just telling me about her father's new acquisition in Dubai. It's a huge opportunity." "Preston," Charlotte said, ignoring the woman, "why are you treating me like I'm invisible? You invited me. We're supposed to be celebrating your promotion." Genevieve looked at Charlotte, then at Preston, raising a perfectly manicured eyebrow. "Is this the assistant you mentioned, Preston? She's very persistent." Assistant, the word hung in the air. Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. "Assistant? We're engaged, Preston." Preston's smile vanished. His eyes turned cold, devoid of the warmth she had fallen in love with. "Charlotte, don't make a scene. Not here. Not tonight. We can talk about this later." "There's nothing to talk about later," Genevieve interjected, looking bored. "Security is very efficient here, darling. Don't make them earn their pay on you." Charlotte looked at Preston, waiting for him to defend her, to claim her. But he just looked away, sipping his scotch, silently wishing she would evaporate. The realization shattered her. Vanessa was right. She wasn't his partner. She was his stepping stone, and he had just climbed past her. "Fine," Charlotte whispered, her voice cracking. "Enjoy your acquisition, Preston." She turned to leave, blinding tears stinging her eyes. But as she spun around, she collided hard with a waiter. The tray of champagne flutes he was carrying tipped, and gravity took over. Crash. The sound of shattering glass silenced the nearby conversations. Cold, sticky champagne drenched the front of Charlotte's vintage navy dress. "Oh my God!" Tiffany shrieked from nearby, feigning shock but clearly delighted. "Look what she did! She's drunk!" "Clumsy trash!" Vanessa muttered, loud enough for the circle of onlookers to hear. Charlotte stood frozen, gasping for air, champagne dripping from her hem onto the polished marble floor. She was wet, humiliated, and the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. The entire room seemed to be staring at her, hundreds of eyes judging the nobody who had dared to crash their world. She fell to her knees, instinctively trying to pick up the broken glass to help the terrified waiter. "Leave it!" a manager hissed, rushing over. "Just get out before you break anything else." Charlotte scrambled up, her hands shaking. She needed to run. She needed to disappear. She turned toward the exit, head bowed, tears finally spilling over. That was when the heavy double doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. A hush fell over the room that was different from the silence caused by the crash. This was a silence of reverence, of fear. A man stood at the top of the stairs. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out a tuxedo, cut with lethal precision. He had dark hair, slightly graying at the temples, and eyes that scanned the room with the intensity of a predator assessing its territory. It was Alexander Thorne. Wait, Thorne is on the banned list. Correction, it was Alexander Knight. It was Alexander Knight, the CEO of Knight Global, the man who owned half the city's skyline, the billionaire who hadn't been seen at a public gala in 5 years. Rumors swirled that he was a recluse, a genius, a monster. But tonight, He was here, and he was looking straight at the chaos near the ice sculpture, straight at the woman covered in champagne. The atmosphere in the ballroom shifted instantly. The air grew heavier, charged with the electricity of immense power. Alexander Knight didn't just have money. He had influence that toppled governments and shifted economies. Preston, who had been trying to ignore Charlotte, suddenly straightened his tie. He puffed out his chest. "That's Knight," he whispered to Genevieve, his voice trembling with greed. "If I can just get 5 minutes with him, my firm would be set for life." Vanessa and her clique stopped their snickering. They adjusted their posture, putting on their most alluring smiles, preening like peacocks, hoping to catch the eye of a passing tiger. "He's looking this way," Vanessa hissed to Tiffany. "Does my hair look okay?" Alexander began to descend the stairs. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, ignoring the sea of hands reaching out to greet him. "Mr. Knight, wonderful to see you. Alexander, about that merger. Mr. Knight, a pleasure." He walked past them all. He walked past the senator who had been holding court near the bar. He walked past the tech mogul who had just sold his company for $3 billion. He didn't even blink. Charlotte, meanwhile, was trying to make herself small. She wiped her face, humiliated, just wanting to reach the side exit. She assumed the hush in the room was just another layer of judgment upon her. She didn't look up until she realized the path to the door was blocked. She stopped. Alexander Knight was standing 5 feet away from her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. His eyes were a piercing steel grey, intelligent and unreadable. He wasn't looking at the spilled champagne or the broken glass. He was looking at her face. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Preston saw his chance. He stepped forward, pushing past Charlotte slightly to get into Alexander's line of sight. "Mr. Knight," Preston said, extending his hand, his voice booming with false confidence. "Preston Walsh, from Walsh and Associates. It is an honor to have you here. Ignore the mess, just some clumsy staff issues. If you have a moment, I'd love to discuss." Alexander didn't look at Preston. He didn't shake the extended hand. He didn't even acknowledge Preston existed. Alexander took 1 step forward, closing the gap between himself and Charlotte. "You're bleeding," Alexander said. His voice was a deep baritone, quiet but carrying effortlessly through the silent room. Charlotte looked down at her hand. In her haste to help the waiter, a shard of glass had nicked her palm. A small drop of blood was welling up. I'm sorry," Charlotte stammered, hiding her hand behind her back. "I was just leaving. I didn't mean to cause a disturbance." "Did you do this?" Alexander asked, his eyes shifting to the waiter, then to the manager who had yelled at her. "No, sir, no," the manager squeaked. She fell. We were just asking her to leave, sir. She doesn't belong here." "Doesn't belong here," Alexander repeated the phrase, tasting it like spoiled wine. Vanessa, unable to help herself, chimed in from the sidelines. "She's a nobody, Mr. Knight. She gate-crashed. Look at her dress. She's just embarrassed herself and everyone else." Alexander slowly turned his head. He looked at Vanessa. The look was so cold, so devoid of humanity, that Vanessa actually took a step back, her mouth snapping shut. He turned back to Charlotte. The harshness in his eyes vanished, replaced by something that looked confusingly like recognition? Or perhaps regret. "May I?" Alexander asked, extending his hand toward her. It was a request, not a demand. Charlotte hesitated. Every instinct told her to run. This was a billionaire. She was a woman wearing a wine-stained dress who had just been dumped by her fiancé. But there was something in Alexander's gaze that anchored her. Slowly, she brought her hand out from behind her back. Alexander took her hand in his. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. He didn't care about the champagne. He didn't care about the blood. He pulled a pristine white silk handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it gently against her palm. "I apologize for the behavior of my guests," Alexander said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "It seems standards have slipped in my absence." The crowd gasped. His guests? This was a charity gala, not a private night event. Unless... "Mr. Knight," Preston tried again, his voice shrill with panic. "You must be mistaken. This woman is just my former assistant. She's having a breakdown. I was handling it." Alexander finally looked at Preston. The gaze was withering. "Former assistant?" Alexander asked. "Is that what you call the woman who wrote the brief that won you the impossible Kensington case last year? The woman who reorganized your entire firm's archival system so you wouldn't be sued for malpractice? The woman who has been the brain behind your mediocre face for 3 years?" Preston's jaw dropped. How do you know that?" Alexander ignored him. He turned back to Charlotte, still holding her hand. "Charlotte," he said. She blinked, tears drying on her cheeks. "You know my name?" "I know a great deal about you, Charlotte Miller," Alexander said softly. "I've been trying to find you for 6 months. My head of talent acquisition sent you 5 emails. You never replied." Charlotte was stunned. I never saw them. Preston manages my inbox. He said he filters out the spam." A dark shadow crossed Alexander's face. "Spam? I see." He glanced at Preston with a look that promised retribution. "He hid the offers because he knew if you left, he would be exposed for the incompetent fraud he is." The room was spinning. The twists were coming too fast. "Why were you looking for me?" Charlotte whispered. Alexander smiled, a genuine, rare expression that transformed his face. "Because, Charlotte, you are the only person in this city who solved the paradox algorithm I posted anonymously on the tech forums last year. You did it in 2 days. It took my engineering team 3 months to even understand the question." The crowd murmured. "The paradox algorithm? That was legendary in the tech world." "That was just a puzzle," Charlotte said. "I did it for fun during my lunch breaks." "To you it was a puzzle," Alexander said. "To me, it was a job interview. And you passed." He turned to the room, still holding her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander announced, his voice ringing with authority. "I would like to introduce you to the new Chief Strategy Officer of Knight Global." The silence shattered. "What?" Preston choked out. "Her?" Vanessa screeched. "And," Alexander continued, looking down at Charlotte with intensity, "she is my guest of honor tonight, which means anyone who has disrespected her has disrespected me." He looked at the manager. "Get her a towel. Now." He looked at Vanessa. "Leave." Then he looked at Preston. "And you? We have a lot to discuss regarding the obstruction of my business communications. My lawyers will be in touch in the morning." Preston turned pale grey. "Come with me, Charlotte," Alexander said, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. "We have better places to be than here." As he began to lead her up the grand staircase, away from the mess, away from the people who had spat on her, Charlotte felt like she was in a dream. But as they reached the first landing, Alexander stopped. He leaned in close to her ear. "Don't get too comfortable yet," he whispered, his tone suddenly serious, dropping the public persona. "Saving you was the easy part. But there is a reason I came here personally, Charlotte. And it's not just because you're smart. It's because your life is in danger." Charlotte stiffened, pulling back slightly to look at him. "What?" "Keep walking," he commanded gently, his grip tightening on her arm. "Smile. Wave." But listen to me. Preston isn't just a bad lawyer. He's laundering money for the Red Syndicate. And you, my dear, are the name he put on all the shell corporations. If we don't fix this tonight, you're going to prison for the rest of your life." The blood drained from Charlotte's face for the second time that night. The drama was just beginning. The interior of Alexander Knight's limousine was quieter than a church and colder than the grave. The heavy doors had thudded shut, sealing out the flashing cameras of the paparazzi and the frantic calls of the valet. Outside, the world was exploding with the news that the reclusive billionaire had walked out of the gala with a nobody. Inside, the reality was far more terrifying. Charlotte sat on the edge of the leather seat, her body rigid. The adrenaline that had carried her down the stairs was fading, replaced by a chilling numbness. "Explain," she said, her voice sounding stronger than she felt. "Now." Alexander sat across from her, pouring an amber liquid from a crystal decanter into a glass. He didn't offer her alcohol. Instead, he handed her a bottle of water and a tablet computer. "Drink," he ordered softly. "Then read." Charlotte took the tablet. Her hands were still shaking, but her eyes focused on the screen. It was a legal document, a founding charter for a company called Helix Horizons, registered in the Cayman Islands. "I don't know this company," Charlotte said, scrolling down. "Keep scrolling to the signature page," Alexander said, his eyes fixed on the passing city lights. Charlotte swiped down. There, at the bottom, was a digital signature. Her signature. Charlotte Miller, Managing Director. This isn't real," she gasped. "I never signed this. I've never been to the Cayman Islands." "You didn't have to go," Alexander said grimly. "Did you give Preston access to your digital notary key? Perhaps to help him file motions when you were working late?" The memory hit her like a physical blow. 6 months ago. Preston had been overwhelmed with the merger documents. He had asked for her digital ID token, the one she used for paralegal certifications, saying he needed to file some urgent briefs while she was at lunch. She had given it to him without a second thought. She trusted him. He was her fiancé. "He told me it was for the Kensington case," she whispered. "He lied," Alexander said, his voice hard. "Helix Horizons isn't a consulting firm. It's a laundry service. Dirty money goes in from the Red Syndicate, mostly from illegal gambling and racketeering in Eastern Europe, and it comes out clean as consulting fees for your supposed firm. In the last 6 months, $30 million has moved through that account." Charlotte dropped the tablet on the seat. The air left her lungs. $30 million. If the authorities find this, you go to prison for 20 years, Alexander finished for her. Minimum. And Preston? He walks away clean. He's listed merely as an external advisor, with no signing power. If the ship sinks, you are the captain, and he's just a passenger who didn't know what was in the cargo hold. Charlotte felt bile rise in her throat. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just that he had cheated on her with Genevieve. It was that he had been planning to sacrifice her life for months. Every "I love you," every discussion about their future wedding was a stall tactic to keep her compliant while he framed her. "Why are you telling me this?" Charlotte asked, tears springing to her eyes again. "Why not just turn me in? You're Alexander Knight. You stand for order. Why help a criminal, even an accidental one?" Alexander leaned forward, his knees brushing against her dress. The proximity was electric. "Because I know you're not a criminal, Charlotte. I watched you solve the paradox algorithm. A mind that seeks order and logic like yours doesn't engage in sloppy financial crimes." He paused, his expression softening. "And because I have a score to settle with the Red Syndicate. They tried to strong-arm my shipping division in Rotterdam 2 years ago. I don't like bullies, and I really don't like men who hide behind women." The car slowed down, turning into the private underground entrance of the night tower. "Preston thinks he has won," Alexander continued. "He thinks he has the money, the new wealthy fiancé, and the perfect scapegoat. Tonight at the gala, he was planning to trigger the leak. An anonymous tip to the FBI is scheduled to go out tomorrow morning, implicating you." Charlotte's eyes went wide. "Tomorrow?" "Yes. That's why he treated you like garbage tonight. He wanted you to leave. He wanted you isolated and emotional, so that when the police picked you up, you'd look unstable." The car stopped. The door was opened by a stone-faced security guard. "We have 12 hours, Charlotte," Alexander said, extending his hand to help her out. 12 hours to reverse the trap. Are you ready to stop crying and start fighting?" Charlotte looked at his hand, the same hand that had saved her from the ballroom floor. She looked at the blood drying on her palm. She thought of Vanessa's laugh. She thought of Preston's dismissive wave. Something inside her snapped. The sadness evaporated, burned away by a white-hot fury. She took Alexander's hand. "I don't just want to fight, Alexander. I want to destroy him." Alexander smiled. It was a dark, dangerous smile. "Good. Welcome to my world." The penthouse of the night tower was less of a home and more of a fortress in the sky. It was a sprawling expanse of glass and steel, overlooking the entire glittering grid of Manhattan. But Charlotte didn't have time to admire the view. Alexander led her straight past the living area, into a room that looked like the command deck of a spaceship. Monitors lined the walls, displaying scrolling lines of code, stock market feeds, and live security footage from various locations in the city. "Sit," Alexander commanded, pointing to a leather ergonomic chair in front of the main console. He hit a button on the desk, and the glass walls of the room turned opaque, sealing them in. He then went to a side cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit. "Give me your hand," he said gently. While Charlotte watched the screens, Alexander cleaned the cut on her palm with surprising tenderness. The sting of the antiseptic was grounding. "Okay," Charlotte said, her eyes scanning the data on the screens. "You said we have 12 hours. If Preston set up the accounts using my digital key, the bank records will show my IP address initiating the transfers. That's the smoking gun." "Correct," Alexander said, applying a bandage. "However, Preston is lazy. He's a lawyer, not a hacker. He used a VPN to mimic your location, but he did it from his office." "Walsh and Associates?" Charlotte asked. "Yes. But his firm's firewall is military grade. We can't hack in from the outside to prove the traffic came from his computer without leaving a trace that would make the evidence inadmissible in court. We need a physical connection." Charlotte stared at the screen, her mind racing. She knew Preston's habits. She knew his passwords. She knew he kept his password sticky note under his keyboard because he was arrogant enough to think no one would dare look. "I can get it," Charlotte said. Alexander stopped packing the medical kit. He looked at her. "No, it's too dangerous. If he catches you—" "He won't catch me," Charlotte said, her voice gaining confidence. "He's at the gala. He'll be there until at least 1 a.m. schmoozing Genevieve and her father. That gives us 3 hours. You don't have a key card anymore. He likely deactivated it the moment you left the party." Charlotte smirked. It was the first time she had smiled all night. "Preston deactivated my card, but he didn't deactivate the cleaning crew's access. I managed the vendor contracts for the office. I know the entry codes for the service elevator and the janitorial supply closet." Alexander looked at her, impressed. "You want to break into a high-security law firm dressed in—" He looked down at her champagne-stained gown. "I need clothes," she said, "and I need a distraction." Alexander walked over to a console and typed in a command. "I can provide both. But if you go in there, you need to do exactly what I say. I will be in your ear the entire time." He opened a drawer and tossed her a small earpiece. "Put this in. I'm going to guide you through the camera blind spots." 20 minutes later, Charlotte had shed the ruined navy dress. She was now dressed in black tactical gear that Alexander apparently kept on hand, a little loose, but functional. She pulled her hair back into a tight ponytail. "There's one more thing," Alexander said, his voice grave. He picked up a phone. "Preston is currently at the gala, yes. But the Red Syndicate has auditors. Dangerous men. If they see anyone accessing the accounts tonight, they might send a cleanup crew. You need to be fast." "I'm fast," Charlotte said. "The car is waiting," Alexander said. "I'll be watching you on the feeds." "Charlotte?" She paused at the door. "Yes?" "If anything feels wrong, if you hear a noise, if a shadow moves, you get out. I don't care about the evidence. I care about you returning in one piece." The intensity in his voice made her heart skip a beat. It wasn't just a business arrangement. He cared. "I'll be back," she promised. The offices of Walsh and Associates were dark and silent. Charlotte moved through the shadows of the 40th floor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The earpiece buzzed. "Corridor clear." Alexander's voice was a comforting presence in her ear. "Camera at the end of the hall rotates every 15 seconds. Wait. Now. Go." Charlotte sprinted softly across the plush carpet, ducking under the sensor range. She reached Preston's corner office. It was locked, of course. "I'm at the door," she whispered. "Standard RFID lock," Alexander said. "I'm running a brute force decryption on the keypad. Give me 10 seconds. The keypad flickered red, then green. Click. Charlotte slipped inside and closed the door softly. The office smelled of Preston's cologne and expensive leather. It made her stomach churn. She moved to his desk and woke up the computer. Locked. Password required. "Okay, let's see if he's still as predictable as I think," Charlotte muttered. She lifted the keyboard. Nothing. Her heart sank. He moved the note. "Try his usuals," Alexander suggested. "His birthday? Genevieve's name?" "No, he thinks he's clever," Charlotte whispered. She looked around the desk. There was a framed photo of him shaking hands with a senator. There was a trophy from a golf tournament. And there was the award for the Kensington case, the case she had won for him. He's a narcissist, Charlotte realized. He would use the date of his biggest triumph. She typed in the date of the Kensington verdict, 4/22/2224. Access denied. "Wrong," she hissed. "Charlotte, you have 5 minutes before the security patrol reaches that floor," Alexander warned. "Think. What does Preston love more than his success? Money." She remembered the account number for the Cayman Shell company she had seen on the tablet. The first 6 digits. It was a long shot. She typed it in. "Welcome, Preston." "I'm in," she breathed. "He's so arrogant, he used the crime as his password." "Plug in the drive," Alexander ordered. "I'm initiating the download." Charlotte inserted the USB drive Alexander had given her. A progress bar appeared on the screen. 20%. 40%. Suddenly, the office phone on the desk blinked. A silent line was ringing. Charlotte froze. "Don't answer it," Alexander said sharply. The answering machine picked up silently, the audio playing through the speaker at low volume. "Walsh!" A deep, heavily accented voice rasped. "We see activity on the account. Why are you logging in at 11:15 p.m.? You were told to wait until the morning." Charlotte clamped her hand over her mouth. It was the syndicate. They were monitoring the account in real time. "The download is at 80%, Charlotte whispered. "They know someone is here." "Walsh," the voice on the machine grew darker. "If you are trying to skim more off the top before the girl takes the fall, we will skin you alive. We are sending a team up. Do not leave the office." Click. The line went dead. "Charlotte, run!" Alexander roared in her ear. "Forget the drive. Get out now." 95%. She stared at the screen. "I can't leave it. It's the only proof. They are in the building. My sensors just picked up a breach in the lobby. 3 men. Armed." "Done." Charlotte yanked the drive out just as the elevator pinged down the hall. She dove under the heavy mahogany desk just as the office door burst open. Heavy footsteps entered the room. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness above her head. "He's not here," a man grunted. "Computer is warm," another said. "Someone was just here." Charlotte held her breath, clutching the USB drive to her chest. She could see their polished black shoes inches from her face. If she moved, she died. If she stayed, she died. "Charlotte." Alexander's voice was a whisper now. The window. She looked behind her, the floor-to-ceiling window behind the desk. "I have a drone outside. It has a glass breaker and a tether line. It's your only way out." The footsteps moved closer to the desk. The man was coming around to check the chair. Crash! The window shattered inward as a heavy drone slammed through the glass, hovering amidst the falling shards. The wind from 40 stories up roared into the room, sending papers flying everywhere. The men shouted in confusion, shielding their eyes from the glass and the drone's blinding spotlight. "Go!" Alexander shouted. Charlotte scrambled out from under the desk, grabbed the tether hanging from the industrial drone, and didn't look back. She jumped into the void of the night sky, just as gunfire erupted behind her. The wind whipped around the helipad of the night tower, howling like a wounded beast. The industrial drone, its rotors screaming, lowered Charlotte onto the painted H. She unclipped the tether, her legs giving way the moment her boots touched the concrete. Before she could hit the ground, strong arms caught her. Alexander didn't care about the drone or the expensive tactical gear. He pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her wind-tangled hair. For a man who controlled global markets with a steady pulse, his heart was hammering against her ribs like a jackhammer. "I've got you," he murmured into her ear, his voice rough with relief. "You're safe. I've got you." Charlotte clung to him, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. She was shaking violently, gasping for air. "I got it," she choked out, patting the pocket of her tactical vest. "I got the drive." "To hell with the drive," Alexander growled, pulling back to inspect her face. "You jumped out of a 40-story window. Are you insane?" "I was motivated," she managed a weak smile. "And you said you'd catch me." Alexander stared at her for a long moment, his steel-grey eyes searching hers. Then he nodded once, a silent vow renewed. "Come inside. We have work to do." Back in the command center, the atmosphere had shifted from panicked urgency to cold, calculated precision. Alexander poured Charlotte a glass of brandy, while his head of cybersecurity, a young woman named Jinx, plugged the stolen USB drive into an isolated server. "You need to see this," Jinx said 5 minutes later, her face pale in the glow of the monitors. Charlotte and Alexander stood behind her. On the screen was a labyrinth of bank transfers, emails, and chat logs. "It's worse than we thought," Jinx explained, pointing to a series of highlighted transactions. "Preston wasn't just laundering money. He was stealing from the syndicate." Charlotte blinked. "Stealing from them? Is he suicidal?" "He's arrogant," Alexander corrected. "Look at the rounding errors on these transfers. He was skimming 2% off the top of every wash, funneling it into a private account in Switzerland under the name Genevieve Holdings. He was building a nest egg to run away with his new heiress. If the syndicate finds out he's skimming, Charlotte started. They kill him, Alexander finished. But that's too quick. I want him to suffer first. I want him to lose everything he thinks he's built. Alexander scrolled down to an email thread dated that morning. From Vargas, Red Syndicate. To Preston Walsh. Subject, final handover. Bring the access keys to the Knight Global Merger meeting tomorrow. If the accounts are not clean, we will have a problem. Charlotte frowned. Knight Global Merger meeting? What merger? Alexander's lips curled into a predatory smile. The one I'm about to invent. Preston thinks he's playing in the big leagues. He thinks if he can secure a contract with me, he'll be untouchable. Too high profile for the syndicate to touch without bringing down heat on themselves. He's counting on my reputation to shield his crimes. So, Charlotte said, the gears in her mind turning, sharpness returning to her eyes. He needs to meet you tomorrow to legitimize himself, and he needs to give the syndicate the keys to the accounts I just locked him out of. Exactly, Alexander said. He turned to Charlotte. Go shower, get some sleep. Tomorrow morning, you are going to die. Charlotte froze. Excuse me? Charlotte Miller, the victim, is going to disappear, Alexander clarified, his voice dropping to a seductive whisper. And the new CEO of Helix Horizons is going to take her place. We're going to give Preston exactly what he wants. A meeting with the owner of the accounts. He just doesn't know that owner is you. I have to face him? Charlotte asked, a tremor of fear returning. No, Alexander said, taking her hand and kissing the bandage on her palm. We will face him, and we will crush him. The sun rose over Manhattan, oblivious to the chaos of the night before. For Preston Walsh, the morning light brought a headache and a sense of impending victory. He sat in the breakfast nook of his penthouse, bought on credit, sipping an espresso. Genevieve was still asleep in the master bedroom. He checked his phone. No calls from the police. No news reports about a body found on the sidewalk. Perfect, he muttered. The break-in last night had spooked him, but the security guards had found nothing but a broken window and a drone. They assumed it was corporate espionage or a prank. The leak to the FBI regarding Charlotte was scheduled to go live at noon. By then he would be sitting in Alexander Knight's office, signing a partnership deal that would make him the most powerful attorney in New York. His phone buzzed. It was an encrypted number. Vargas. Do you have the keys? Vargas's voice was like grinding gravel. I have them, Preston lied smoothly. The accounts are ready, but I'm moving the handover. I have a meeting with Alexander Knight at 10 a.m. Once I sign with him, I'll transfer the control to you. Knight's infrastructure will make the money untraceable for good. Vargas paused. You are playing a dangerous game involving Knight. He is not a man to be trifled with. He's just a businessman, Preston scoffed. He needs legal counsel. I'm the best. Trust me, Vargas. By lunch, we'll all be rich. He hung up, straightened his tie, and smiled at his reflection. You're a genius, Walsh. At 9:45 a.m., Preston walked into the lobby of Knight Tower. He was flanked by 2 junior associates, trying to look important. He wore his most expensive suit, a navy Brioni, that he felt projected authority. I'm here to see Mr. Knight, Preston told the receptionist, flashing his teeth. Preston Walsh. Mr. Knight is expecting you, the receptionist said coolly. Top floor, boardroom A. Preston smirked at his associates. See, that's how you handle the big dogs. They come to us. The elevator ride was smooth and silent. When the doors opened on the top floor, Preston strode down the hallway like he owned the building. He pushed open the heavy double doors of the boardroom. The room was vast, dominated by a long table made of black obsidian. At the far end sat Alexander Knight, looking relaxed and dangerous. He was reading a file, his feet resting casually on an empty chair. But the room wasn't empty. Sitting to Alexander's right were 3 men in rough leather jackets. They looked out of place in the pristine office. Preston recognized the man in the middle immediately. Vargas. Preston's step faltered. Vargas. What are you doing here? Mr. Knight invited us, Vargas said, his eyes dark and suspicious. He said there was a discrepancy with the accounts you promised to hand over. Preston felt a bead of sweat roll down his back. Discrepancy? There's no discrepancy. Alexander, Mr. Knight, we're here to discuss the partnership. Sit down, Preston, Alexander said, his voice calm but commanding. He didn't offer a handshake. Preston took a seat opposite Vargas, his heart rate picking up. I don't understand. Why is the syndicate here? This is highly irregular. I value transparency, Alexander said. You see, Preston, you told Mr. Vargas that you had control of the Helix Horizons accounts. You told me you were a reputable lawyer. It seems one of you is being lied to. I have the control, Preston insisted, pulling his laptop out of his bag. I can log in right now. Please do, Alexander gestured to the massive screen on the wall. Cast it to the main monitor, so we can all see. Preston's fingers flew across the keyboard. He navigated to the offshore banking portal. He typed in his username. He typed in his password. Access denied. Preston frowned. He typed it again. Access denied. Account locked. Technical glitch. Preston laughed nervously, tugging at his collar. The bank's server must be down. The server isn't down. A female voice spoke from the shadows in the corner of the room. Preston froze. He knew that voice. But it was impossible. A chair swiveled around from the darkness near the window. Charlotte Miller sat there. But it wasn't the Charlotte he knew. Gone was the vintage dress. Gone was the shy, stammering assistant. She was wearing a tailored white power suit that cost more than Preston's car. Her hair was sleek, her makeup sharp and fierce. She looked like a queen on a chessboard, and Preston was the pawn she was about to sacrifice. Charlotte, Preston whispered, his face draining of all color. You were fired. And you were dumped, Charlotte said, her voice ice cold. She placed a small USB drive on the obsidian table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The password didn't work, Preston, because I changed it. You see, as the managing director of Helix Horizons, a title you gave me, I have sole executive power. Vargas slowly turned his head to look at Preston. The look was murderous. You said you had the keys, Vargas growled. She's lying, Preston shouted, standing up. She's my ex-fiancée. She's crazy. She stole my laptop. Sit down. Alexander's voice was a thunderclap. Preston collapsed back into his chair. Now, Alexander said, folding his hands. We have a problem. Preston has stolen $30 million from the Red Syndicate. He has also attempted to frame my chief strategy officer, Ms. Miller, for the crime. And according to these logs... Alexander tapped the table, and the screen on the wall changed. It showed the side-by-side comparison of the syndicate's money and the Genevieve Holdings skimming account. He has been stealing from you, Mr. Vargas. 2%. For 3 years. The silence in the room was deafening. Preston looked at the screen. He looked at Vargas, who was slowly reaching into his jacket. He looked at Alexander, who was watching with amused detachment. And finally, he looked at Charlotte. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking right at him. And for the first time in their relationship, she wasn't looking at him with adoration. She was looking at him with pity. Karma is a bitch, Preston, she said softly. And so am I. Wait, Preston screamed, scrambling up. I can explain. It's a mistake. Genevieve made me do it. Pathetic, Alexander muttered. He pressed a button on the intercom. Send them in. The double doors opened again. But it wasn't the police. It was Genevieve, and she looked furious. You told them what? She shrieked, storming into the room. The room was now a powder keg, and Charlotte was holding the match. The boardroom of Night Tower had become a gladiatorial arena. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and palpable fear. Preston Walsh stood cornered, his eyes darting between the four forces arrayed against him: the criminal underworld, the corporate titan, the scorned lover, and the furious heiress. You blamed me? Genevieve's voice wasn't just loud, it was shrill enough to crack the glass walls. She marched up to Preston and slapped him. The sound was crisp, echoing like a pistol shot. I am Lady Genevieve of the House of Laurent. My father owns half the shipping lanes in Marseille. Do you think I would dirty my hands with your cheap money-laundering schemes? Preston held his stinging cheek, stammering. Jen, listen. I had to say something. They were going to kill me. I did it for us. There is no us, Genevieve scoffed, turning to the room. I was only dating him because he promised he could get my father a meeting with Alexander Knight. He was a stepping stone, and a slippery one at that. Charlotte watched the scene from her chair, her expression unreadable. It was a revelation that would have broken her heart 24 hours ago. Now, it just confirmed what she already knew. Preston was a hollow man, surrounded by people just like him. Enough! Alexander's voice cut through the bickering. He stood up, and the room fell silent. We are wasting time. Mr. Vargas, you have seen the evidence. Mr. Walsh has been skimming from your organization. He has compromised your security protocols, and he is currently trying to implicate a civilian, Ms. Laurent, in his crimes. Vargas stood up slowly. He was a mountain of a man, and the look he gave Preston promised a very short, very painful future. He has stolen from the syndicate. By our laws, he belongs to us. Vargas signaled to his men. They stepped forward, reaching for Preston. No! No! Preston shrieked, backing into the window. Alexander, you can't let them take me. They'll kill me. I'm a citizen. I have rights. Rights? Charlotte spoke up, standing slowly. She walked around the table until she was face to face with her ex-fiancé. Did I have rights when you set up shell companies in my name? Did I have rights when you planned to send me to federal prison for 20 years while you sipped cocktails on a yacht with her? Preston looked at Charlotte, desperation clawing at his throat. Char, please. I'm sorry. I panic, okay? I'm a coward. You know I am, but you can't let them kill me. We were in love once. Doesn't that mean anything? Charlotte looked at him. She looked at the man she had wasted 3 years on, and she felt nothing. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound sense of closure. It means I won't let them kill you, Preston, Charlotte said softly. Preston slumped with relief. Thank you. Oh God, thank you. However, Charlotte continued, turning to Alexander, I believe in justice. And justice isn't a mob hit. Justice is the law. Alexander smiled. He pressed a button on the table. The boardroom doors burst open for the 3rd time, but this time it was a squad of FBI agents in tactical vests, guns drawn. Federal agents, nobody move! Vargas and his men froze. They looked at Alexander with betrayal in their eyes. Don't worry, Vargas, Alexander said smoothly. You have diplomatic immunity, for now. You can walk out, but leave the lawyer. The FBI agents ignored Vargas. Clearly a deal had been cut behind the scenes, and swarmed Preston. Preston Walsh, You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit identity theft," the lead agent announced, snapping handcuffs onto Preston's wrists. "What?" Preston gasped as he was slammed against the obsidian table. "You called the feds, but the syndicate. Vargas." "Mr. Vargas just became a cooperating witness against you," Alexander said, leaning against the table. "You see, Preston, when you steal from everyone, you leave yourself with no allies. Vargas agreed to testify about your skimming operation in exchange for safe passage back to Europe. You are the fall guy for everyone." Preston struggled against the cuffs, his face purple with rage. "You set me up. This is entrapment. Charlotte, you did this." Charlotte stepped closer as the agents hauled him up. She leaned in, her voice steady and clear. "I didn't do this, Preston. You did. I just solved the puzzle." As they dragged him out of the room, Preston screaming obscenities, Genevieve looked at Alexander, adjusted her diamond necklace and asked, "So, about that meeting with my father?" Alexander didn't even look at her. "Get out!" Genevieve huffed, grabbed her purse, and stormed out, leaving Charlotte and Alexander alone in the wreckage of the morning. 3 months later. The Manhattan skyline was painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun set over the city. On the private terrace of the night tower, the wind was gentle, carrying the scent of jasmine from the rooftop gardens. Charlotte leaned against the railing, holding a glass of champagne. This time her hand was steady. She wore a dress of emerald green silk, no longer vintage, but custom-made. "You're thinking about him," a deep voice said from behind her. Charlotte turned to see Alexander. He had loosened his tie, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a man at peace. "Not about him," Charlotte corrected. "About the sentence. 15 years. "He got off light," Alexander said, joining her at the railing. "Considering he tried to sell out the Red Syndicate and the FBI at the same time, he'll be disbarred, broke, and in prison until he's 50. "It's strange," Charlotte mused. 3 months ago, I was crying in a ballroom because I thought my life was over. I thought being a nobody was the worst thing that could happen to me. And now?" Alexander asked, turning to face her. "Now I know that being a nobody is a choice," she said. "I let people treat me that way. I let Vanessa, Preston, all of them dictate my value. I won't do that again." "Speaking of Vanessa," Alexander said, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Did you hear? Her father was removed from the board of the Charity Foundation after an anonymous audit revealed mishandled funds. She's currently selling her wardrobe on eBay." Charlotte laughed, a free, genuine sound. "You are dangerous, Alexander Knight." "I protect my investments," he said, stepping closer. The air between them charged with the same electricity that had sparked on the gala stairs. "And you, Charlotte, are the best investment I've ever made. The strategy department has never been more efficient. You see things no one else sees." "I'm just doing my job," she whispered, her heart beating faster. "Is it just a job?" Alexander asked. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her skin, warm and rough. "Because for me, it stopped being just a job the moment I saw you standing in that spilled champagne, looking like you wanted to burn the world down." Charlotte leaned into his touch. "You saved me." "No." Alexander shook his head, his eyes intense. "I just opened the door. You walked through it. You saved yourself." He lowered his head, his lips hovering inches from hers. "So," he murmured. "What's the next puzzle, Ms. Miller?" Charlotte smiled, closing the gap between them. "I think," she whispered against his lips, "we're just getting started." As they kissed, high above the city that had once tried to crush her, Charlotte knew one thing for certain. The girl who was treated like a nobody was gone. In her place stood a woman who owned her world. And the billionaire CEO, he was just the man lucky enough to hold her hand. And that, my friends, is the story of Charlotte and the ultimate hard karma. It's a reminder that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, whether they are arrogant lawyers like Preston or cruel socialites like Vanessa, true power comes from intelligence, integrity, and the courage to stand up when everyone expects you to fall. Preston thought people were disposable, and in the end, he was the one thrown away. What did you think of Alexander's plan? Would you have let the syndicate take Preston, or was prison the better revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. We have an even crazier revenge drama coming up next week, involving a runaway bride and a secret prince, and you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on, because you never know who is holding their hand. See you next time.